Every year when Christmas time rolls around, you watch the same movies you watched the year prior, over and over. And some of the staples of the holiday are the obvious Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer and Frosty the Snowman. Rudolph's stop-motion animation is a standout among the other Christmas movies, with only a few like it. And not surprisingly, the stop-motion movies are made by the same company, Rankin Productions. But what you may not know is that Frosty is also made by them, along with many, many more lesser-known Christmas movies. But an even lesser-known fact is that all of these movies make up one giant shared universe similar to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the Rankin Cinematic Universe. And now, I'm going to go over every single movie that makes up their shared universe and how they are all connected. But first, here I am in the Oval Office, and today, I don't have an innuendo or a joke to tell you. All I want to say is I hope you all are going to have a Merry Christmas, and hopefully whatever you wish for, Santa Claus will drop off underneath your tree. As president though, it better say Made in America. Rankin Productions was created by Arthur Rankin Jr. and Jules Bass. Rudolph is their claim to fame, along with their iconic stop-motion style. Rankin is so synonymous with stop-motion that I think most people don't even realize Frosty is also made by them. Rankin has 36 TV specials, 6 feature-length movies, and tons of TV shows, along with a handful of live-action movies. Some of these projects are rather well-known, like The Last Unicorn and Thundercats. Not all of these, though, are in the cinematic universe. None of the live-action, none of the TV shows, and none of the feature-length movies. Not even all of the 36 TV specials are in the cinematic universe. Despite nearly every single one being about the holidays, they just don't connect with the others. Of the 36 specials, 22 are not part of the cinematic universe. There are multiple reasons. Some of them are other IPs, like The Hobbit. Others, there just isn't a connection to the others. Surprisingly, The Ballad of Smokey the Bear doesn't share a universe with Rudolph and Frosty. Even a movie like The First Christmas, The Story of the First Christmas Snow, aka the longest title ever. You might expect this one to be part of it, but there's not a character or event that connects it. This leaves us with 14 TV specials. Our universe starts with the Little Drummer Boy. Said Little Drummer Boy is Aaron. He's a misanthrope that hates all of humanity because his parents were killed. He travels around with a donkey, a lamb, and a camel. Aaron and his animals are kidnapped by a caravan and are taken around and exploited until he runs into 3 wise men. He follows them to that event that people nowadays put in their front yard with big plastic people. I think there's some significance to that event. Aaron's lamb is about to die, and the only way to save it is to drum a little song for a newborn. And magically, the lamb is healed. Happy ending. Peace on earth. Oh, by the way, that baby is Jesus Christ. Heard of him? This movie sets up the big event all of the other movies are based around. Christmas, of course. Right after this movie, The Little Drummer Boy Book 2 happens. It seriously picks up right where we left off, and nothing really happens in this movie. Next movie in the timeline, Nestor, the long-eared Christmas donkey. He was born with extremely long ears and gets picked on for it. Birth defect that everyone makes fun of? Sound familiar? But anyway, Nestor was alive before the birth of Christ. Because of his giant floppy ears, his owner hates him, and eventually throws him out in a blizzard, trying to kill him. His mother goes out and protects him, sacrifices herself, and she freezes to death. Wow, what a great way to start a Christmas movie for kids. Nestor is visited by a little angel named Tilly, and she tells him he must travel to Bethlehem. When he is on the outskirts of Bethlehem, no one still wants to buy him because of his humongous Dumbo ears. After a bit, Joseph and a pregnant Mary come to the stall and pick Nestor. Nestor carries Mary to Bethlehem during a sandstorm. Guess what he uses to shield her? His parachute-sized ears. They were useful after all. Also, his mother speaks to him from the sky throughout the movie and is just extremely depressing. Now we're moving many years into the future. Santa Claus is coming to town, one of the 3 most popular Rankin stop motions. The story is all about the history of Santa Claus. Our story begins on a narrator, S.D. Kluger. He's Santa's postman. He decides to tell the story of Santa's past because it is such a frequently asked question. A little baby orphan with a tag that has Claus written on it is dropped off on the doorstep of the mayor of Sombertown. The mayor is Burgermeister Burger. He's a nasty, mean, cold curmudgeon. Burgermeister does not want the baby and orders it to be taken to the orphan asylum. But on the way there, wind blows the sled and baby Claus to a house owned by an elf family, the Kringles. They adopt him and name him Chris. The Kringles are toy makers, and as Chris gets older, he vows he will deliver toys to the sad and gray town of Sombertown. However, Burgermeister has just banned all toys in the town. On Chris's journey to Sombertown, he meets a little penguin and nicknames him Topper. He also briefly encounters another villain called the Winter Warlock. He forbids anyone trying to pass the mountains of the Whispering Wind. They don't exactly explain why the Winter Warlock is evil, by the way. I guess he just is. Chris manages to get away, but the Winter Warlock promises to get him on his way back. When he reaches the town, he meets a schoolteacher named Miss Jessica, and he gives her the thing she has wished for since she was a child, a China doll. She ultimately takes it despite initially being sort of brainwashed. Burgermeister finds out, and Chris and Topper are rushed out of town, where he is then captured by the Winter Warlock. Don't worry though, this is like a 10-second inconvenience. Chris gives the Winter Warlock a toy train, and it melts his icy cold heart, and basically becomes human. Now he just wants to be called Winter. Winter then pledges his magic to help Chris deliver toys. Winter also teaches Chris how to see when kids are bad or good, and so on, you know all the stuff. Burgermeister destroys the toys Chris brought, so Chris then leads a mass effort with the help of all of his friends to deliver more toys. Chris has to sneak in through chimneys to deliver these toys. See? It's all coming together. Well, everyone is arrested for toy smuggling, except Miss Jessica. Luckily, Winter has magic feed corn that can make reindeer fly. Jessica takes this corn and feeds it to the reindeer, and they rescue Chris, Winter, and all of his help. When the narrator lists the reindeer, Rudolph is also briefly mentioned, even though he wasn't there. Just saying. They don't really defeat Burgermeister, he just kinda falls out of power off screen. Kris Kringle takes up his original Claus name because there is a manhunt out for him. Chris and Jessica get married and she becomes Mrs. Claus. Winter uses his magic and creates the first Christmas tree at their wedding. At the very end, Chris and Jessica grow old and become the Santa and Mrs. Claus we know today. Fantastic, we got our main character throughout the Rankin Bass cinematic universe. You can forget Winter. As cool as he was, he doesn't show up again. Along with Topper. Remember Santa, obviously, and Mrs. Claus, of course, but surprisingly, you will need to remember S.D. Kluger, the postman and the narrator of this movie. He will show up again. Next up, The Year Without a Santa Claus, aka the Snow Miser and Heat Miser movie. Be real, this is what we watched this one for. Some time has passed and Santa acts completely opposite to how he was in the last movie. He is now sad and thinks children no longer believe in him, so he has decided to cancel Christmas. Mrs. Claus takes it upon herself to save Christmas. She instructs two elf brothers, Jingle and Jangle, to find evidence of Christmas spirit. They take a young vixen with them. Plot hole number 2. Last movie, Santa had all 8 reindeer, and they were all grown. So now this movie is after that one, and Vixen has been de-aged. This is actually less of a plot hole than you may think, and I will explain this later. They search around in the southern United States in a place called Southtown. Vixen is detained and taken to a dog pound, and when Santa finds out, he comes to the rescue disguised as a regular human. They meet a boy named Iggy who learns Santa's true identity, and then Iggy helps them. They talk with Southtown's mayor, and he agrees to release Vixen if they can make it snow in Southtown. Mrs. Claus comes to save the day. She grabs the gang and goes to Snow Miser, the keeper of cold weather, aka Mr. White Christmas, aka Mr. Snow, aka Mr. Icicle, aka Mr. 10 Below. But ultimately, he is called Snow Miser, and whatever he will touch, it will turn to snow in his clutch. He's too much. He's also the coolest character, literally. They ask Snow Miser to make it snow in Southtown, but he cannot, as the South is part of his brother's land, and his brother is the Heat Miser. They then go to Heat Miser, keeper of warm weather, aka Mr. Green Christmas, aka Mr. Sun, aka Mr. Heat Blister, aka Mr. 101. Whatever he will touch, it will melt in his clutch. He's too much. Okay, I'm not doing that again. Heat Miser agrees to cooperate as long as Snow Miser hands over the North Pole, which he denies. Mrs. Claus pulls out the big guns and goes to their mommy. And of course, it's Mother Nature. She makes them come to a compromise very quickly. Now that it begins to snow in Southtown, it generates some Christmas spirit, which then leads to headlines around the world with children planning to send gifts to Santa if he decides to take this Christmas off. This makes Santa change his mind and Christmas continues as usual. Next movie in the timeline, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. The one who started this whole thing. This movie is narrated by Sam the Snowman. Rudolph is born to Donner, one of the 8 main reindeer. Rudolph is born with a defect, and he has a red glowing nose. And it makes an annoying, shrill, high-pitched noise that makes my dog confused every time this movie is on. As an outcast, even getting hate from his own parents, and the other reindeer that won't let him play in reindeer games, he runs away, leaving behind a potential new girlfriend named Clarice. I mean, even Santa is mean to him. There's another character named Hermie. He's an elf that doesn't want to make toys, but instead wants to be a dentist. So just like Rudolph, he's an outcast. The two band together and go on an adventure. They have to watch out for the evil, abominable snowman known as Bumble. They meet a prospector looking for silver and gold named Yukon Cornelius. The 3 of them venture together until they run into Bumble again, where they break off a chunk of ice and create a little boat. They are guided to the island of misfit toys, where unloved, malfunctioning, and deformed toys get sent. The island is led by a winged lion named King Moonracer. The king allows them to stay for one night and requests they ask Santa to bring all the junk toys to kids that would love them. Rudolph leaves in the night in fear of endangering his friends as his loud, glowing, high-pitched nose attracts Bumble. A bit of time passes and Rudolph begins to grow up. He eventually returns home only to find his parents and Clarice have left looking for him. He travels to Bumble's cave where the 3 reindeer are captured. Hermie and Yukon show up to help Rudolph and they completely mutilate Bumble, ripping all of his teeth out. Jeez, Hermie. It appears he unleashed all of his pent-up anger. Yukon then jumps off a cliff with Bumble and they think he died. They all return home, and not far behind them is Yukon and a trained Bumble that now has turned good, I guess. They survived because Bumble's bounce, saving both of their lives. Kind of a weird explanation. The writers could have just not made them fall. Santa announces Christmas is about to be canceled because the snow is just too thick. Oh my god, Rudolph's nose will save the day, and thus he is lauded as a hero. They return to the island of misfit toys and drop them to kids. Fun fact, they just didn't do that in the original airing. They just kind of forgot about the misfit toys, which is rather ironic. We all know Rudolph. We all love Rudolph. The movie's great. But the sequel isn't so well known. Rudolph's Shiny New Year. I question if this was a passion project or a money project. This story is whack. The very same foggy night after Santa gets home, he gets a letter in the mail from Father Time, telling him baby New Year has gone missing, and thus time will stop passing. Okay, hold up. Explanation time. The way time works in the Rankin cinematic universe is that a baby is born and throughout the year, it ages rapidly, like multiple years a month, and by December, he is wildly old and is about to die, and pass the torch to a new baby New Year. However, this year, their baby New Year, named Happy, has ran away. Guess why? Anyone know? Can anyone guess? Same reason Nestor the donkey and Rudolph ran away. Birth defect. Of course. This time, it's the same defect as Nestor. He's got jumbo ears. Due to it being the foggy night still, Rudolph is the perfect one to help. Rudolph has now been de-aged, despite being hours after the original movie. At the end of the first one, he was pretty grown up. Now he's got smaller antlers and is back to his boyish self. It had been 13 years since the original. I'd also like to point out Rudolph isn't the only one to de-age, as Vixen did in Year Without a Santa Claus. So perhaps there is... No, don't even suggest some stupid theory. Also, Hermie and Yukon Cornelius, along with Clarice, Bumble, and all of the other characters, just aren't in this movie. It's only been hours, and we basically never see them in a movie ever again. Such a weird choice to do that. Rudolph ventures to the land of time with some help from clock-related characters. They also encounter our antagonist for this movie, Eon the Terrible. He is a vulture that lives to an eon, but only an eon, and he's terrorized the land of time for an eon, and his time is up in a week, and then he becomes ice and snow. So he is trying to nab baby New Year so time never passes and he can't die. Once again, that's like so sad. But at the same time, dude's been alive for an eon. He's had his fair share. Pretty cool concept for him, but it's kind of weird that he's a vulture. Rudolph sets out to rescue Happy because he empathizes with his ridicule. Okay, time for the movie to get really wacky and really weird. Every past year is saved on an island, just like a backup on a thumb drive. And all of these islands of years past make up the archipelago of last years. Happy has traveled across these islands and is hiding on one of them. Rudolph begins his journey on the ocean and is quickly attacked by Eon, but Rudolph is saved by Big Ben, a large whale with a clock tail. Rudolph travels on a lot of islands that represent thousands of years in the past. The first island is 1 million BC, with dinosaurs on it. Rudolph befriends a caveman named OM, short for 1 million, and they journey together. On other islands, Rudolph runs into certain Mother Goose characters along with the 3 bears. He goes to the island of 1776, led by Sev, short for the year. He's basically Benjamin Franklin. Eon has captured Happy and is taking him to his lair on the island of No Name, due north of the North Pole. Rudolph gets to Eon's nest where he is asleep. Rudolph relates with Happy, yet still laughs at his ears. Then Eon laughs at his ears so hard that he falls off the mountain. He's fine, but Rudolph says he won't freeze now because his heart is full of warmth and happiness. I guess Rudolph just decides to change the rules of how Eon's life works, for Happy to become the next Father Time. This isn't like the best resolution. At least everyone in Rudolph said they were sorry for him. In this, they defeat the villain based on Happy's deformity. He's still just gonna get made fun of. Whatever. This was a weird sequel. Rankin Bass didn't just make Christmas movies. They made holiday movies of all kinds, including some Easter ones. Here Comes Peter Cottontail, The First Easter Rabbit, and The Easter Bunny is Coming to Town. All of these movies are connected to the Rankin Bass cinematic universe as well. In Here Comes Peter Cottontail, who is destined to be the Easter Bunny, has to reclaim the title and travels via a time machine from holiday to holiday. Anyway, skipping most of the plot, Peter and his villain Irontail have a very brief run-in with Santa, the very same Santa we know and love. Next, in the first Easter Rabbit, it's about going to the North Pole to save Easter or whatever. The plot, again, is not important, but you know what's in the North Pole? Santa Claus. And the last movie is called The Easter Bunny is Coming to Town. Sound familiar? Yeah. It's a ripped plot from Santa Claus is Coming to Town. The very same postman narrator, S.D. Kluger, narrates it, connecting this movie to the timeline. Okay. Now time to introduce our second flagship movie, Frosty the Snowman. Just like Rudolph, we know the song of how he came to be. Using a magic hat from a failed magician, Frosty the Snowman came to life. This magician, Professor Hinkle, has lost his bunny as well, Hocus Pocus, and the bunny befriends Frosty and his creator, Karen, a little girl. They journey to the North Pole so Frosty can live forever, but they don't quite make it because, shocker, the Arctic is not the place for a little girl. Hinkle has also been following them to get his hat back. Frosty and Karen go to a greenhouse to keep her warm, while Hocus Pocus heads to get Santa. Frosty melts because they were locked in the greenhouse by Professor Hinkle, but with Santa's magic, he is revived. Hinkle is given an ultimatum and lets Frosty keep the hat, and then he has to write apologies 100 zillion times. And then he gets a new hat. It's a happy ending with a redeemed Hinkle. Frosty stays in the North Pole, promising to return every year. Now the sequel, Frosty's Winter Wonderland. Years have passed, and Frosty decides to return. A newcomer named Jack Frost grows jealous of the love Frosty receives from the children. He attempts to steal his hat so he will be loved, but steals the wrong hat. Every night when the children sleep, Frosty is lonely out in the snow, so the children build him a snow wife. With no way to bring her to life, Frosty makes her a bouquet of frost flowers, and the power of true love brings her to life. Her name is Crystal. Jack Frost blows away Frosty's hat, and he is dead? Is it considered dead? He just is not alive temporarily. Using the power of love from Crystal, she makes Frosty a snow corsage, which brings Frosty back to life. Now he doesn't even need his hat, but because he is angry, Jack Frost gives it back anyway. Frosty and Crystal are going to get married, but they need a snow preacher to do it, and they bring him to life with a Bible. Jack Frost intends on ruining the wedding, but Frosty and Crystal talk with him, and he becomes the best man. Something about Frosty, man, just redeeming all of his enemies. With warmer weather approaching, Jack Frost uses his powers to extend it, but since that is considered dangerous, the three of them return to the North Pole. Now, let's talk about Jack Frost, the movie. This frozen dude got his own origin story, and they bring him to stop motion. Just when you thought they had done a movie about every holiday, here comes Jack Frost with Groundhog Day. I'm not kidding. So there's this real nasty dude called Kubla Kraus. He's the king, and he's so miserable and arrogant that no one will live with him. So his soldiers and horse are made of iron. Jack Frost falls in love with a human girl, and he asks Father Winter to become human so he can love her. Father Winter agrees as long as Jack can prove himself as a real human by getting a house, a horse, a bag of gold, and a wife by springtime. Father Winter turns a few of Jack's friends human to make sure he doesn't stir up too much trouble. The girl he likes, Eliza, likes Jack, but also has feelings for a knight, Sir Ravenel Rightfellow. Eliza is soon kidnapped by Kubla Kraus to be his bride. Turns out, Kubla Kraus also owns all of the gold, brick, and wood in the town, rendering it impossible for Jack to achieve his goals. Sir Ravenel rescues Elise, while Jack and his friends are captured in the dungeon after their attempt. And after this, Kubla Kraus vows to send 1,000 knights to wreak havoc on the town. Jack realizes the only way to stop him is to create the biggest blizzard ever. In order to do this, Jack gives up his humanity and freezes over the entire castle. It continues to be frozen until Groundhog Day, where Jack scares Pete, the groundhog narrator, back into his burrow, and thus winter continues. Some time passes, and with an hour before spring, Jack returns to human form to stop Kubla Kraus once and for all. He tricks the knights into walking off of a cliff, and Father Winter simply blows Kubla Kraus away. This leaves Jack with all of Kraus's gold, his castle, and his horse. Jack rushes to Elise, however she is already taken by Sir Ravenel. Jack turns back to his icy self and stays that way. How depressing. Once again. Thanks, Rankin and Bass. So now we've established every character. We have essentially our Avengers, Rudolph, Frosty, Santa, and Jack Frost, all with their origins. It's time for what is the equivalent to Infinity War. The movie is Rudolph and Frosty's Christmas in July. It's a whopping 1 hour and 37 minutes long, with it being nearly double what most of the specials are. So there's this dude, Winterbolt, king of the North Pole. He was king thousands of years ago, and he was a bad, evil king. Big meanie head. Essentially, a god in human form comes to stop him. Lady Boreal. She is the human form of the Aurora Borealis. the Northern Lights. She puts Winterbolt into a deep slumber. Thousands of years later, during the Rudolph timeline, just a bit before Christmas, Winterbolt finally awakens and learns he is no longer king of the North Pole, and Santa has taken over. He speaks to the genie of the Ice Scepter, which is like a talking wall. He learns of Santa and that he brings toys to all the children. He plots on how to stop them, and his plan consists of having his snow dragons create a giant ice storm to prevent Santa Claus. It's all coming together. Winterbolt created that foggy night where they needed Rudolph. Are you ready for your mind to be blown even further? Lady Boreal is so old and is running out of power to stay a human. She comes to Rudolph the night he was born, and she gives him some powers. That being his red, shiny nose. Lady Boreal tells Rudolph his nose will glow as long as he uses his power for good. If he ever uses it for evil, it will go away. Gee, thanks Lady Boreal. You caused Rudolph to get bullied and have a rough start to life. How magical. So fast forward some time, and Rudolph and Frosty are friends now. They don't elaborate how they know each other, which I feel like would have been important. Frosty is in stop motion for the first time. He now has kids, which implies Frosty and Crystal, I can't exactly recall the scene when Karen and the other kids made Frosty's snowballs, so I'm not sure if these are really his kids. Maybe they built them instead of doing it traditionally. Winterbolt tries to extinguish Rudolph's nose, but Rudolph's power is greater than his. If Winterbolt wants his full power back, Rudolph's nose must be extinguished. The Wall Genie tells Winterbolt that Rudolph has to use his power for evil to lose it, and that is Winterbolt's new goal. Winterbolt also has the same power the Winter Warlock showed young Santa, looking into a ball of snow and viewing people. So maybe they're connected, I don't know. They're really similar characters. Winterbolt's problems are solved by a hot air balloon. So this dude, Milton, shows up in a hot air balloon. He's friends with Rudolph and Frosty. He rambles and rambles about some lost love or whatever. We've introduced too many characters at this point, and this dude's lame anyway. We don't need to know him. Winterbolt persuades Milton with magic through his viewing snowball orb and suggests that they join the circus. Milton knows of the circus because his girlfriend is in it, blah blah. They try to make him a fleshed out character, but he's really not much in this movie. Frosty and Fam want to go too, but since it is July, they'll melt. Winterbolt shows up, and since no one knows who he is, he pretends to be a nice fairy godfather, instead of being evil. He gives Frosty and Fam little amulets that when worn, they will not melt no matter the temperature. But there's a catch. They will stop working when the last firework goes off for the 4th of July celebration, which is at the circus. They tell Santa their plans, and he agrees that he will travel to the circus as well, and pick up Frosty and gang before they melt. Winterbolt uses some persuasion on Santa as well. Winterbolt also enlists the help of a bum reindeer that was kicked out of the reindeer team to make room for Rudolph. Don't worry, he was also a thief and also just rotten anyway. Rudolph, Frosty and family, and Milton all arrive at the circus and they join it. They extend the runtime of this movie way longer than need be and do a lot of filler. While Santa and Mrs. Claus are on their way to the circus, Winterbolt creates a tornado and they are sucked into it, preventing them from reaching the circus. That rotten reindeer named Scratcher tricks Rudolph into stealing money, so Rudolph will technically do bad with his magic. The fireworks have started. Santa isn't there and Rudolph and Frosty are getting suspicious. Frosty and Crystal then profess their love for each other and sing together as they know they are about to die, since Santa is no longer coming. Man, these Rankin Bass movies never fail to just be horrendously sad. Winterbolt arrives, and since they still don't know he is the villain, Rudolph and Frosty request that he extend the amulet's time past the final firework. He says he will do it as long as Rudolph's nose stays extinguished. Rudolph does his best, but cannot light his nose and doesn't understand why. Winterbolt makes Rudolph admit that he stole the money and must never clear his name, otherwise the amulets will run out. Rudolph admits it, and Crystal no longer wants her snow children associating with him. The kids are sad too, and with tears in their eyes, they ask Uncle Rudolph, which is what they call him, "Why'd you do it?" Frosty wants to explain it so bad, but Rudolph instructs Frosty that he can never tell the truth. Frosty is sitting alone and wishing, isn't there something he can do to help Rudolph? Winterbolt watches him back at his fortress with his magic snowball. Winterbolt asks the genie of the Ice Scepter, and he tells him about Frosty's magic hat, and that if he had the hat, he could find the origin of the magic and make an army of snowmen. Winterbolt uses his persuasion of magic and persuades Frosty through the snowball. Rudolph is spoken to by Lady Boreal, except for now, she's just the Northern Lights. Suddenly, Big Ben, the giant clock whale from Rudolph's Shiny New Year, shows up. He says he was guided by the Northern Lights. Frosty is going to give up his hat for Rudolph's power to be back. Winterbolt lied, of course, saying that he can give it back for the hat. Frosty knowingly sacrifices himself, saying that he's going to miss Crystal and his kids, but especially Crystal. Way to undermine your kids, dude. He sings a little song and it shows Frosty's true friendship and good nature. And then Winterbolt yanks the hat from him and Frosty dies. Big Ben leaves Rudolph and tells him he has a plan and he's heading to South America. Rudolph returns to find Frosty's body and confronts Winterbolt. They both fly away. Shortly after that, Crystal and her 2 kids find Frosty. What a horrific scene once again. Really just trying to make children sad, Rankin Bass. Rudolph fights Winterbolt and snatches the hat back. Once Rudolph wears it, he gains his power back. Rudolph returns after Frosty's family and all of the other characters have been mourning him. Rudolph gives the hat back and clears his name. It looks like a happy ending, and then suddenly Winterbolt appears once again. But his scepter is quickly broken. It was his last source of power. Once that is gone, he has a very brutal death scene. It's deserving, though. He slowly gets turned into a tree. Now that Winterbolt is gone, so is his magic, rendering the amulets useless. Now Frosty, Crystal, and their children are puddles. The only thing that can save Frosty from a puddle is a cold December winter wind. And since it's July, Frosty's a goner. Surprise! Big Ben arrives with Jack Frost. No way, the crossovers are insane. Jack Frost was in South America because that's where winter is in July. Jack Frost does his thing and they are all revived. Santa and Mrs. Claus comes flying in too, since the storm is now gone. Jack Frost continues to blow Frosty and his family so they don't melt. Santa also gives some of his magic corn feed to the circus so they will have an amazing act of flying animals. I have to mention this because remember the magic corn feed from Santa Claus is Coming to Town? Callbacks. So many callbacks. Then it's a happy ending. And with that, it ends the Rankin Bass cinematic universe. So there are other Christmas movies released after this, like The Life and Adventures of Santa Claus, and The Leprechaun's Christmas Gold, to name a few. But they are not a part of the universe. This is how I can confirm it. Santa Claus was only ever voiced by 2 different actors, Mickey Rooney and Paul Frees, with the exception of Stan Francis in the original Rudolph. Mickey Rooney voices Santa in Santa Claus is Coming to Town, Year Without a Santa Claus, and Rudolph and Frosty's Christmas in July. Paul Frees voiced Santa in Frosty the Snowman, Here Comes Peter Cottontail, The First Easter Rabbit, and Rudolph's Shiny New Year, making these 2 voice actors the canon Santas. All Santas in other movies are voiced by different actors. Alan Swift voices Santa in both 'Twas the Night Before Christmas and Pinocchio's Christmas, but neither of those are in the cinematic universe anyway, so it doesn't matter. Now let's bring into question the other Rudolph movies. Other Rudolph movies, you say? Yes. Some other companies had the balls to try and make new movies based on the characters. In essentially a reboot, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, the movie, a movie with a budget of $10 million that only made back $100,000, aka gigantic flop. They reworked the original and butchered it. It's not made by Rankin Bass, so it goes without saying it's not a part of the universe. The same company, for some reason, and makes absolutely no sense, made another Rudolph movie. But this time it's a sequel. And no, not a sequel to their Rudolph, but Rankin Bass's. Again, not made by Rankin Bass, so it's not in the universe. But look how awful this terrible slop looks. Awful, low-budget, early CGI. I'm not even gonna bother with the plot, but you know what? Rudolph wasn't the only one with unfaithful reboots. Frosty returns. My god, no please. And then wouldn't you believe it, The Legend of Frosty the Snowman, voiced this time by Patrick Starr.
Happy birthday! Well, then I guess we're not twins, are we?
Again, neither are made by Rankin Bass, and don't really follow any continuity with the original. Finally, the biggest knockoff of all, 2008's A Miser Brothers Christmas. Snow Miser and Heat Miser are back at it again. Luckily, it's not made by Rankin and Bass. Wait, no. It was made by Warner Brothers, who own the Rankin Bass library. Uh-oh. Well, I mean, surely this isn't canon. Oh no, Santa. In this movie, he's voiced by Mickey Rooney. It's canon. The Santa voice actor rule applies. Okay, it's actually not that bad, but their designs look awful. Snow Miser and Heat Miser return home for a family reunion with Mother Nature and their siblings. North Wind, Earthquake, Thunder and Lightning, and the Tides. Clever. Snow Miser and Heat Miser are feuding back and forth per usual. North Wind asks his mother what would happen if Santa were unable to fulfill his duties on Christmas. She tells him that he would be the one to take over. Despite his seemingly innocuous question, North Wind's true intentions are to take over Christmas so he can get all of the praise. Simply because he is vain. A weather vane, some might say. North Wind causes Santa to hurt his back, thinking he will take his reins. However, after Mother Nature learns of what happens, she assigns Snow Miser and Heat Miser to Santa's duties. All they do in this movie is fight back and forth in the workshop. When they are shown the naughty and nice list by Mrs. Claus, they learn they have been on the naughty list all of their lives due to their feuding. And this inspires a change in their behavior. They end up learning of North Wind's plot, and he is sentenced to 1,000 years of chores by Mother Nature. Snow Miser and Heat Miser carry out Christmas that year and Kumbaya. This movie has almost a completely original track list, except for they reuse the original Snow Miser and Heat Miser songs, which kinda feel a little cheesy. And now that's the official ending of the Rankin Bass cinematic universe as far as I know, spanning from 1964 all the way to 2008. 44 years. Such an iconic and mostly amazing franchise, and it's awesome we get to watch them every year and totally don't get bored of them. I hope you all have a fantastic Christmas, and you best be good for Santa. Merry Christmas to you all, and to all a good night.